My name is Iris Calden, 71 years old. I used to run the small community library on 13th Avenue before my lungs gave out 3 winters ago. I've always believed that peace lives in routine tea at 5, radio at 6, lights out before 10. Even sickness feels easier when the world keeps its rhythm. That afternoon, the rhythm broke. Late sunlight poured through the kitchen window, catching the dust that floated above the counter like pale smoke. My daughter Maeve was at the stove, humming the same tune I used to sing when she was little. She'd been visiting every day since I caught the flu. She said she wanted to help me recover, to give back after everything I'd done. I wanted to believe her. The smell of chicken broth filled the room, warm and familiar. I moved quietly down the hallway, my slippers brushing the old linoleum. Maeve didn't hear me. Her back was turned, her shoulders tense beneath the pale sweater she used to wear to yoga classes. I saw her open a small white packet, something like powdered medicine, and pour it into the bowl she'd already set on the table. The powder disappeared into the soup with a single stir. I stood frozen in the doorway. For a heartbeat. My mind refused to understand what my eyes had seen. Then she turned. "There you are," Maeve said brightly. "This will make you feel better." She placed the bowl before my seat, her smile wide and steady. I smiled back. My voice didn't shake. "Thank you, dear. You always take such good care of me." She turned to fetch her own bowl from the counter. My hand moved on instinct. I switched them hers for mine. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my face stayed calm. We sat together at the table, the steam rising between us. She talked about the weather, the neighbor's dog, her plans for the garden. I nodded, spooned my soup, tasted nothing. 15 minutes later, she went quiet. Her face flushed. Sweat gathered along her hairline. When her hand began to tremble, I reached for my phone, pressed the emergency number, and spoke softly to the dispatcher as the spoon slipped from her grasp. By the time the sirens reached our street, I was already standing at the sink, watching the steam fade into the air. The ambulance took Maeve away before dusk, its lights flickering across the bare walls. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling the wood pulse with my heartbeat. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was hollow, as if the house itself was holding its breath. 3 weeks. That was how long this quiet sickness had been creeping through me. It began with a headache that refused to leave, then a heaviness in my limbs that made the stairs feel steeper each morning. Some days, my tongue felt slow, my thoughts half a second behind. I blamed age, the flu, the weather, anything but her. Maeve had been so attentive. She brought herbal teas that smelled of mint and valerian, soups rich with turmeric, powders she said were natural boosters. I drank, obedient and grateful. I remember her voice each time warm, rehearsed, almost maternal. "You need strength. Mom, let me take care of you." I saw the pattern now, like a bruise forming under old skin. The worse I felt, the more she hovered, the more she hovered, the weaker I became. When I visited Dr. Leon Sorrell, my longtime physician, he smiled kindly, said it was post-viral fatigue. "You're healing slower, Iris, but you're healing. Rest. Stay hydrated." His voice was gentle, confident, and wrong. That night, I sat at the small desk near the window and opened my old appointment ledger, the one I used back at the library. Each page was lined neatly, waiting to be filled. I wrote the first entry day 1, Tuesday, dizziness after breakfast. Maeve made tea, then day 3 soup with crushed herbs, tremors, and again day 7 sleepy, unsteady, speech slurred. Maeve stayed all afternoon. The entries bled into each other as the pattern grew clear: food, fatigue, and her name on every line. By the time the moon rose, my handwriting had steadied. I closed the ledger, slid it into the drawer beneath my teacup, and whispered into the quiet kitchen. I see it now. The night outside was cold, but I felt something colder. Certainty settling where love used to live. The next morning, the house smelled faintly of antiseptic and cooled chicken broth. I stripped the sheets from the guest bed, folding them into neat squares. Maeve's perfume lingered on the pillowcase, something floral and cloying. The kind she started wearing after she left her husband. The rhythm of folding, pressing, and stacking calmed me until a corner of the fitted sheet snagged beneath the nightstand. I knelt to tug it free and saw something glint near the baseboard. A small, crumpled packet. White paper with a pharmacy logo smudged almost clean. I turned it over and read the faded print. Clonazepam 1 mg. For a long moment, I just held it between my fingers. My breath came shallow, deliberate. The name was familiar. I'd shelved enough medical pamphlets at the library to know it was no vitamin, a sedative. Controlled, dangerous in the wrong hands. I slipped it into my pocket and finished folding the linen as if nothing had happened. That afternoon, I drove to Dr. Sorrell's clinic. He was alone, still in his lab coat, glasses perched low. When I placed the packet on his desk, his eyes narrowed. "Where did you find this?" "In my house," I said. "Guest room." He exhaled slowly, tapping the edge of the wrapper. "This is prescription only. Iris, used for anxiety. Seizures. It can make you weak, confused, disoriented, especially at your age. Please tell me you haven't been taking anything from unmarked bottles." I shook my head. "I've only taken what Maeve brings." Something flickered across his face. Hesitation. Pity. Maybe disbelief. He slid the packet into an envelope. "Let me run the batch number. And Iris? Be careful who you trust." On the drive home, his words looped through my mind, soft as static. The trees along Willamette Street blurred into green streaks. That night, I took the packet from my purse and hid it inside my old wooden recipe box, the one with my mother's handwriting still faded on the lid. Then I opened my ledger, turned to a fresh page, and wrote with a steady hand, Day 22. Found proof. I will not die politely. Maeve came back 2 days later, pale but composed. A paper bracelet still around her wrist. She carried a grocery bag that clinked faintly with jars and bottles. I was sitting in my armchair, a blanket over my knees, pretending to nap. "Mom," she called softly, setting the bag on the counter. "Turns out the broth was bad. The ER doctor said food poisoning can knock you out like that. I'm so embarrassed." Her voice was syrupy, carefully measured. I opened my eyes halfway and smiled faintly. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm just glad you're all right. You gave me quite a scare." She hesitated, then smiled back. It didn't reach her eyes. "I brought fresh stock and some herbs. Thought I'd cook again. You shouldn't worry about meals while you're still recovering." I nodded, slow and grateful. "You always take such good care of me." While she unpacked, I watched from my chair. Every movement of hers was too precise, too rehearsed. She kept glancing at the trash bin near the sink, the same one where she'd hidden the packet after that first soup. I'd emptied it the morning after the ambulance left. Scrubbed it clean, replaced the liner. Whatever she was looking for wasn't there anymore. She stirred the pot, humming under her breath. The same tune again, something between a lullaby and a warning. The house filled with the smell of simmering vegetables. And beneath it, faintly, a metallic tang that didn't belong. "Smells good," I said, standing slowly. My knees creaked, but my balance was steady. Maeve turned quickly, concern flickering. "Careful." "Mom, sit down. Please." I don't want you getting dizzy again. I'm fine, I said gently. You always worry so much. We both smiled. And for a moment it might have looked like an ordinary afternoon mother and daughter sharing soup. Warmth, small talk, but the air felt thinner, charged. I saw her hand tremble as she stirred, the spoon clinking against the pot. I sat again, folded my blanket neatly across my lap, and said, "Tell me about your garden plans, Maeve." Her smile didn't change, but her eyes darkened, and the humming stopped. By the end of that week, the quiet in the house had grown so heavy it pressed against my skin. Maeve still came by with groceries and recipes, all smiles and careful words. But every gesture felt rehearsed. I needed facts, not fear. So, on Thursday morning, I called Mr. Halden, the attorney who had handled our family's papers for years. He met me in his downtown office, a narrow space lined with worn legal books and the faint scent of coffee gone cold. Halden was a man of few words and fewer smiles, his glasses perched at the end of his nose as he scanned my file. "You haven't been in for a while, Mrs. Calden," he said. "Still happy with your arrangements. I'd like to review them," I replied. "Routine, of course." He turned a few pages. "The will names your daughter, Maeve Calden, as sole heir, the house. The account's roughly $2.3 million in assets. She's also listed as your healthcare proxy in case of emergency." The words sank slowly, like stones in water. I hadn't looked at that document since before my husband died. Back then, Maeve's laughter still sounded genuine. "I might make some small updates soon," I said carefully. "And, Mr. Halden, if my daughter contacts you about any changes to my estate or medical permissions, could you make a note of it? Quietly." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Shall I ask if everything's all right?" "Not yet," I said, "but you'll know when it isn't." When I returned home, the house smelled faintly of rosemary and lemon. Maeve was in the kitchen, humming again, phone pressed to her ear. I stopped in the hallway. "Listening?" "Yes." "I know," she was saying. "The property's the hard part. But once it's all settled, we can finally start over." She laughed softly light. Practiced. Familiar. I could almost see the smile in her voice. I stepped back before the floorboard creaked. Heart steady, eyes dry. The ledger on my desk waited open, a blank line ready for today's entry. I wrote only one word beside the date motive. 2 mornings later, Maeve arrived early, carrying a folder under her arm instead of groceries. The air between us had cooled, formal and measured. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my tea, the ledger tucked beneath a newspaper. "Good news," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I talked to Dr. Sorrell yesterday. He thinks it's smart to have some paperwork updated, just in case you ever have another spell." Her tone was light, but her eyes stayed fixed on mine. She opened the folder with practiced care, spreading several forms across the table. "These are medical authorizations, power of attorney, health directives, you know, standard stuff. I brought them for you to sign while you're feeling good." I took my glasses from the counter and set them deliberately on my nose. "That's thoughtful." "Maeve," I said, voice steady, "let's look at them together." She smiled. "Too quick." "Sure." "Of course." I reached for my phone, pretending to silence a notification, and pressed record. My finger trembled only slightly. The papers rustled between us. The first page listed my name, address, and date of birth. The next had lines for signatures mine, a witness, a notary. One line, near the bottom, already bore handwriting that mimicked my own. Too neat, too round. My chest tightened. Did Dr. Sorrell fill this in? Maeve's expression flickered. He must have. Or maybe his nurse did. They're just preparing in advance. I murmured, tracing the ink lightly. The smell of her perfume mingled with paper sweet and chemical. She tapped the table impatiently. Mom, it's just paperwork. You trust me, don't you? The mask slipped in that instant, her smile thinning, her eyes sharp with something like calculation. I looked up, calm. Of course, darling. I trust you with everything. I gathered the pages, aligned their corners neatly, and slid them back into the folder. But I'd like Mr. Halden to review them first. Routine, you know. Her mouth tightened. You don't need to bother him for this. I insist, I said softly, rising to place the folder on the counter. Tea's still warm. Would you like some? She didn't answer. The silence filled the kitchen like fog. I invited Maeve for dinner on a Friday evening, just before the sun slipped behind the pines. I told her I was feeling better, that I wanted to thank her for all she'd done. She arrived on time, dressed in soft gray, carrying a tin of her favorite herbal blend. I thought we'd end the week with something peaceful, she said, placing it on the counter. Chamomile and valerian, it'll help you sleep. That sounds lovely, I replied. My voice was even, warm. The small recorder was already tucked beneath the lace runner on the dining table, its red light hidden under the fabric. We ate slowly baked salmon, roasted carrots. Silence. The rhythm between us was fragile, like glass ready to crack. She spoke about bills and the rising cost of everything, about how lucky I was to have the house paid off. I nodded, listening to every word, filing them away like catalog cards. When dessert came, apple compote with cream, she rose to boil water for tea. I heard the faint crinkle of a packet, the quick stir of a spoon. Steam rose in soft curls. She brought 2 cups to the table, sliding one gently toward me. Here, Mom, it'll help you rest. The scent was floral but heavy. I lifted the cup, watching the surface tremble slightly in the candlelight. You always want me to rest, don't you? I said, keeping my tone light. Conversational. Maeve didn't look up. You'll rest soon enough, she murmured, her voice drifting. Her eyes on her phone as if the words meant nothing. Something inside me went still. I reached beneath the table and pressed the button to stop the recorder. The faint click sounded like a door closing. Maeve looked up then, smiling. What is it? Nothing, dear, I said, setting the cup down untouched. Just thinking how quiet the house feels tonight. She smiled again, but it didn't last. Her reflection wavered in the tea between us, a shimmer of warmth over something cold. When she left later, I waited until her car disappeared down the street, then walked back to the table. The recorder was cool to the touch, the small red light dark. My hand didn't shake as I slipped it into my coat pocket. By Monday morning, the recorder sat on the table beside the folded packet and my ledger. The proof was small, ordinary, and heavy as stone. I wrapped everything in a dish towel and placed it in my handbag before driving to the sheriff's station. The air outside smelled of damp pine and rain-soaked pavement. Deputy Shaw met me in the reception area. He was a quiet man in his 40s, with patient eyes and a voice that made people talk. I told him I wasn't sure where to begin, and he said softly, "Start at the moment you stopped feeling safe." I laid the towel on his desk and unwrapped it piece by piece, the packet labeled clonazepam 1 mg, the small recorder, the notebook with careful handwriting in blue ink. When I pressed play, Maeve's voice filled the room, calm and clear. "You'll rest soon enough." Shaw didn't speak for a while. He just nodded and asked, "Can I keep these, please?" I said, "And contact Dr. Sorrell. He should have my blood results from the last month. He promised he would." The rest unfolded quickly, the way a storm breaks without thunder. That afternoon, I returned home to find 2 unmarked cars parked across the street. From the kitchen window, I saw the officers waiting until Maeve's sedan pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, phone in hand, smiling faintly. When they approached her, confusion flashed across her face, then disbelief. Inside, I stood very still. The porch light flickered through the curtains as the officers spoke to her. I couldn't hear the words, only the rise and fall of her voice, sharp, pleading, then suddenly quiet. One of them opened her purse and pulled out a bottle of unmarked capsules, then a phone. Shaw's colleague scrolled through it, showing him the screen. Through the window, I saw Maeve's shoulders slump. Her hands were cuffed gently behind her back. She looked up toward the house. Toward me. I stepped onto the porch as they led her away. The wind lifted the hem of my cardigan. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I simply watched until the taillights vanished into the trees, then turned off the porch light and went back inside. Winter came quietly that year, soft rain tracing the windows and collecting in silver threads along the gutters. The house felt larger without Maeve's footsteps, both lighter and lonelier. I kept the rooms tidy but empty, as though I were preserving silence itself. 3 months after the arrest, a letter arrived. The envelope was pale gray. The return address from the county detention center. Her handwriting was still elegant, looping and careful, but the paper carried a faint scent of disinfectant. I sat by the fireplace and unfolded it. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I wasn't myself. The stress, the debt. Everything got out of control. I never meant to hurt you. You have to believe that. I just wanted us both to be free, to start over. Please don't hate me. Love, Maeve. There were smudges near the end, maybe tears, maybe damp fingers. I read it once, folded it along the original crease, and fed it into the fire. The paper curled slowly, blackened, and drifted into itself until nothing but a thin outline of her words remained. Outside, the mail truck moved on, its tires hissing over wet pavement. Inside, the clock ticked softly, steady as breath. Over the following weeks, neighbors stopped by with polite concern that never lasted long. At church, people spoke in lowered tones, eyes sliding away when I walked past. They didn't know what to say to a mother whose daughter had tried to kill her. Dr. Sorrell came one evening, unannounced, carrying a small basket of tangerines. He stayed only a moment, long enough to check my pulse and the color in my cheeks. Before leaving, he rested a hand on my shoulder. You survived more than illness, Iris, he said quietly. When he left, the scent of citrus lingered. I sat by the fire again, watching the last coal fade. The air was still, my hands warm, and for the first time in months, the silence no longer felt like punishment. A year had passed since the night the sirens came. The house no longer echoed with fear. Only the small, ordinary sounds of living rain against the porch roof, the hum of the old refrigerator, the soft clatter of spoons in the drawer. I stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. The movements were slow and deliberate, the same way my mother once taught me always simmer, never boil. Steam curled upward in gentle ribbons, fogging the window that looked out over the lake. The water beyond the glass shimmered under early spring light, still and forgiving. The deed to the house now rested in the name of the Willamette Seniors Foundation. The papers had been signed months ago, witnessed by Mr. Halden, his expression careful but kind. I'd kept a small lifetime lease, a promise that the house would remain mine until I no longer needed it. After that, it would become a refuge for women who'd lost everything. It felt right. I ladled the soup into a single bowl, the steam brushing my face like a benediction. On the counter beside me, my old recipe box sat closed. its lid faintly worn where my thumb always rested. I had thrown away the ledger weeks earlier. Some records didn't need to last. I carried the bowl to the kitchen table and sat down. The first spoonful was rich with thyme and garlic, familiar and whole. The warmth spread through me slowly, the way peace sometimes does unnoticed until it fills every corner. The light outside shifted, sliding across the lake like a soft hand smoothing water. I set down the spoon, looked at the quiet kitchen, and smiled. Trust is like soup, I murmured. One wrong ingredient, and you'll never taste peace again. The steam rose, thin and steady, disappearing into the afternoon air as the house settled into its silence.